Russia has begun its invasion of Ukraine. What does it mean for the Ukrainians? What does it mean for NATO? What does it mean for Russia? What does it mean for the United States? I'm Randall Terry. This is Voice of Resistance.
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked. Those who uphold the law resist them. Welcome to the Voice of Resistance.
Welcome to the program, friend. Quick history lesson here. In 2008, President Bush, then President Bush the younger, went to Ukraine and said he openly supported Ukraine's desire to be in NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, put up a map, please, for the viewers. You see that Ukraine has a huge border with Russia. And when Ukraine was making these efforts to join NATO, Putin called the leader of Ukraine and said, "Hey, come on over to Russia, let's talk." And he said, it's theoretically possible and probable that if Ukraine joined NATO, that there would be missile systems put in Ukraine pointed at Russia. That means that Russia would point missile systems, including nuclear weapons, at Ukraine. Ponder this just for a moment. Now, as the Russian Empire has expanded and contracted over centuries, you have to remember that Kiev, which is right now the capital of Ukraine, at one point in history was the capital of Russia. There are literally millions of ethnic Russians or people with a certain amount of Russian descent and blood in them in Ukraine. So in 2010, I believe it was President Yanukovych who was elected into Ukraine. He said, let's not pursue Ukraine being in NATO. Let's be non-aligned. So that effectively killed the opportunity for Ukraine to go into NATO. NATO was birthed in response to perceived and real Russian/Soviet Union aggression against smaller nations. And at the end of World War II, sadly, then President Roosevelt and then Truman, but Roosevelt first cut the deal that the nations that were occupied by the victorious Allies should adopt the forms of government that the victorious Allies shared or had, which meant effectively that any place where Russian troops had defeated the Nazis was going to be absorbed into communism. This, in my opinion, my studied opinion, it was one of the greatest evils and treacheries of President Roosevelt and the Allied powers. And if you've ever seen the movie Patton, you know that Patton was saying, let's just go ahead and fight the Russians right now. They're weak. We know that we're going to end up fighting them. They're communists. Let's drive them out of these nations before they become slaves. Of course, his idea was openly ridiculed, and he was killed. He died what appeared to be an assassination. I digress. The current situation is dire because there is no chance, none, of NATO intervening to protect Ukraine. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, boiled down to layman's terms, if you attack one member of NATO, you have attacked all, and all members of NATO are obligated by treaty to rush to the defense of that NATO member. So what has some analysts nervous is that as Putin has been rambling on and on about what nations were historically part of the Russian orbit, including, say, the Baltic states, he seems to be indicating that Russia doesn't want to stop with Ukraine. Now, when the Russian troops moved in the past few days, this was about a few breakaway areas. Like I told you, There are pockets and areas of Ukraine where there are enormous numbers of Russians. So poor President Zelensky, the current president of Ukraine, there is no chance that Ukraine can repel a Russian invasion. And the last report that I read said that 60%, a full 60% of Russia's standing army, its ground forces, are now surrounding the north, the east, and a portion of the south, the southern area of the border of Ukraine. 60%. And as much as we, as Americans, might like to be dismissive of Russian military hardware, it's not to be trifled with. And Russia, should it decide to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it would be bloody. It would be horrific. I'm going to take a break. When we come back, we will continue this discussion. Please don't go away. Welcome back, friend. A word to the wise is sufficient. Please do not look at what is going on with Russia and Ukraine in any end-time scenario. Please. There are good people out there who are going to seize on this. And I say they're good because, I think that they mean well. But they're going to seize on this and say this has something to do with end times and the coming of our Lord Jesus, his second coming, the Parousia, whatever you want to call it. It's not. And for those of us who have been around a while, going all the way back to the 70s, we've been down this path before with well-meaning people telling us that the Soviet Union and Mikhail Gorbachev with that thing on his head and all this stuff, that it was all related to the end times and to the Antichrist, and it was all false. And it proved to be a huge distraction. So let's look at this as an international crisis, for certainly a national crisis for the Ukrainians, an act of severe aggression from the Russians. Just hold it for what it is. So the Ukrainians wanted to be independent. They wanted to be non-aligned. That is going to prove to be a fallacy. Now, allegedly, the Russians have lists of people, and this has been reported widely in the press, that should they get into Russia, that there are people that are to be arrested and either imprisoned or killed. This includes journalists. It includes political advocates, critics of Russia. If the areas where Russian troops are now on the ground in Ukraine, President Zelensky of Ukraine has not ordered any resistance because in those areas he knows it would be futile. He has ordered all reservists between 18 and 60 to be called up. Now, reservists who are not disciplined, seasoned military, full-time soldiers, they are going to be killed at a ratio far higher than normal soldiers. So what's going on right now inside of many of these people's hearts is either we fight and we die with honor to protect the name and the culture and the history of Ukraine that is not a part of a Russian orbit, or what's the use? Let's not have our sons and daughters be killed. How this is going to play out, I don't know. I feel very strongly that if President Trump had been in office, this would not be happening. We, as Americans, America is the leading force of NATO. And right now we have at the head of our government and the commander-in-chief of our military is a dolt. He is not equal to the task. And I don't mean to be unkind, but he really is just not equal to the task. So they've been saber-rattling about all these sanctions they're going to bring. And then Biden's latest statement was that we have not yet implemented the most severe of sanctions. So they've put NATO pilots on high alert. But remember, these NATO pilots, this is all simply about protecting NATO members. So any saber rattling that we are doing on a military level, anything that's happening in the Mediterranean, anything that's happening in any body of water with any U.S. or English ship, it's all saber rattling to say stay away from NATO forces. Right now, even though Putin has indicated, hey, I'd like to take back some of that real estate, he's not in a position to do it. And he knows that the combined military strength of the United States, England, France, and Germany would be able to decimate Russia in a conventional war. Conventional war means non-nuclear. A non-nuclear war. American hardware at land, at sea, and in the air would be devastating to the Russians. Not without severe loss for the Americans and the French and the English, make no mistake. But we would be able to prevail. So then it begs the question, if Russia was crazy enough to try and take a NATO ally, and the United States and its allies in NATO repelled that, would somebody be foolish enough to pull a nuclear trigger? The military theory of these massive stockpiles of nuclear weapons is called, as you know, MAD, crazy. MAD, mutually assured destruction. So the odds of Russia saying we're willing to lob a nuke at London and at Paris and at Washington, D.C., knowing that we would send nukes to Moscow and St. Petersburg, I just don't. As crazy as Putin might be, he's not that crazy. I could be wrong. I just don't think I am. I don't believe that unless you had some type of a Muslim death wish that, hey, wait a minute, I get to kill a bunch of infidels and then they attack me and I'm being attacked by infidels and therefore I'm a martyr and therefore I go straight to heaven. Unless you were dealing with some afterlife death wish, you're not going to want to see your nation's capital or its most important cities be absorbed in a nuclear cloud. I'll be right back.
I also want to speak tonight directly to Muslims throughout the world. We respect your faith. Its teachings are good and peaceful. And those who commit evil in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah.
We have reaffirmed again and again that the United States is not and never will be at war with Islam. Islam teaches peace.
Islam is a religion of peace. They are not Muslims, they are monsters.
We've been told that Muslim terrorists have hijacked the peaceful religion of Islam. But Islamic art and literature tell a very different story. To know the truth, we only have to study the narrative of the founder of Islam, Muhammad, in his own words. Welcome back, friend. By the way, on the end times thing, we were talking off the air about somebody who watched one of my shows, right? Steadily and calmly explained that the people who are obsessed with the second coming in an unhealthy, unbiblical way, that they are in part responsible for why the West, and America in particular, have just gone to hell in a handbasket. If we really believe that all this craziness going on around us is a sign of the times, then why would we try and fight it? If it's a sign of the Lord's second coming. So anyway, I've made some people upset with this over the years, but you know what? I used to believe the stuff, and I was one of the people who was saying, nothing we can do about it. And then I realized, wait a minute, I'm being had. And there's people that have made small fortunes. In the year 2000, I did an analysis. I'm sorry, I'm way in the weeds, but I did an analysis of all the books that were coming out about the year 2000 being the end of the world. And man, there were millions of dollars of books sold that were all poppycock. All right, let's go back to today. Just suffice to say, let's not view what Putin is doing and Russia is doing through an end times grid. Let's look at it through a political grid. We can look at it through an ethical grid, a moral grid. We can look at our non-response through a moral grid. Our non-military response. St. Augustine, most of Western military theory is based upon either the Melian dialogue, the strong do what the strong want to do because the weak can't stop them, or it's based upon St. Augustine, where you go into war for the sake of justice and righteousness. And there are certain rules. Depending on whose rules of St. Augustine you read, you have to have a just cause and you have to have at least a chance of victory to launch what would be called a just war or to respond to aggression. So there are things that are called a defensive strike. Then there's a preventive strike. And then there's a new one called a preemptive strike. The Jews did a preemptive strike when they bombed Iraq, the nuclear reactors back in early 80s, 80 or 81, when Menachem Begin was prime minister and he sent those 4 planes in. And Saddam Hussein was developing nuclear weapons that he intended to use against Israel. Israel figured it out, said, nah, we don't think so. And they flew, blew it up and left. That was called a preventive strike, way ahead of the curve. Earlier, when the Jews fought the Egyptians, it was a preemptive strike because all those people were lining up, all those Arab allies were lining up, they were going to attack Israel, and Israel knew it, everyone knew it, so Israel struck first. That was a preemptive strike. It's like somebody comes up to you and says, I'm going to kick your butt, and you believe them. But rather than let them hit first, you bang, you chop them in the neck or whatever it is, kick them. Because you believe that this threatening posture that they have presumed is real. Everyone has been watching Russia. We knew that this was not a joke. Russia has economic interests with Europe that would serve, one would think, as a bit of a leash. Maybe not a bit and a bridle, but a leash. So it's February. If the invasion moves forward into March or April, then the need for Russian fuel, for heating fuel, is going to be far less, and it will impact Russia financially far less. If Russia had done this in December, and then all of Europe said, fine, we're not taking any gas from you, Europe would have a crisis of heat. Russia would have a crisis of cash. Europe might be more interested in something a little bit more aggressive against Russia if their homes are cold. And Russia might be floundering a little bit more without some of the euros and the dollars that are flowing in because of the fuel that they supply to Europe. So Putin waiting till what is effectively going to be the spring was a smart economic move on his part, as well as a military move. But the whole concept of a just war of St. Augustine, or St. Augustine, we're going to watch this happen, people. Ukraine is going to get mugged in broad daylight. And the people with the power to stop Russia are not going to stop Russia. And the reason that they're not going to stop Russia is because the cost would be so high in lives. And people are looking and saying, when Bush went to Ukraine in 2008, there were over 40% of the Ukrainians that viewed America with suspicion or viewed the West or NATO with suspicion. There were people holding signs. I'm not saying it was a ton of people, but Yankee go home. Remember, Ukraine lived under the orbit of Soviet misinformation for decades. And it's not part of the people at that time who were alive were not used to freedom as you and I understand it. And many of them were culturally Russian or had Russian blood in them, Russian relatives. So the fact that Ukraine did not come in to NATO is not necessarily, this is our third segment? Okay. Is not necessarily solely because of European feebleness or Russian threats. It also had to do in part with Ukrainian people and Ukrainian politicians themselves. Now, they have a gun to their head. President Zelensky, I'm sure, is asking for every last bit of American hardware that he can get, anti-tank missiles and anti-aircraft missiles. What we are in fact delivering or not delivering, I don't know. There have not been a lot of reports about it. Either that's because we're not doing anything or because the U.S. is frantic to keep it secret. Now, early on, Biden did make known that we would be giving some hardware to the Ukrainians. And during the Trump administration, there was a lot of military hardware and people sent to teach the Ukrainian army how to use it. There was a lot sent. But what is their capability right now? What level of training do they have? What posture do they have? How many of these weapons are in the hands of Ukrainian military that have Russian blood in them, Russian relatives, secret affinity with the Russians? I don't know. You know, it's one thing to consider the aggression that could occur between America and Mexico. It's another to think of aggression occurring between America and Canada, because we share a European history with Canadians that is different than the Spanish history that we might or might not share with Mexico. Just think that through, all right? This is not anything other than a historical observation of which empires of Europe conquered or dominated which parts of the Americas, North, Central, and Southern America, or South America. So just consider us facing war with Canada. It's crazy. It's crazy talk. Or, you know, the French considering war with England. Now, yeah, the French and the English did fight wars in the past. And yes, there was a war with America and Canada. It was very short, but it's just not where we are today. Russia and Ukraine, there's people in Ukraine, they're like, we don't want to fight the Russians. They're our friend, Mother Russia. So it'll be interesting to see what Zelensky does. And I guarantee you, he knows that he could be killed. I guarantee you, he knows that he could be killed. And if Ukrainian forces collapse in the presence of Russia, it's likely that many of the senior political leaders of Ukraine will go into exile. I'm way ahead of myself, but we've seen things like this happen before. We've got to take a break. I will be right back. Don't go away.
I also want to speak tonight directly to Muslims throughout the world. We respect your faith. Its teachings are good and peaceful. And those who commit evil in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah.
We have reaffirmed again and again that the United States is not and never will be at war with Islam. Islam teaches peace.
Islam is a religion of peace. They are not Muslims, they are monsters.
We've been told that Muslim terrorists have hijacked the peaceful religion of Islam. But Islamic art and literature tell a very different story. To know the truth, we only have to study the narrative of the founder of Islam, Muhammad, in his own words. Welcome back, friend. Evidently, I went way too long. I've only got a few seconds left. I have a favor to ask you. We are taking a bunch of kids to film festivals next week at Capernaum Village or Capernaum Studios, where the first season of The Chosen was filmed. And then the following week, we're going to be at the NRB, National Religious Broadcasters Convention, for a film awards ceremony. I'm asking you, if you believe in what we do, I'm taking 3 families to Texas. These are all kids who have been in a major motion picture. They helped on set. Many of them have a passion and a desire to be in the communications movie industry. I'm asking you, please support them. It's about $150 a kid. And we're raising the money to do it. Would you go to randallterry.com and make a contribution? If you want to see young people in storytelling, please go to randallterry.com and give a gift to help support these kids. God bless you.